I never thought I would find myself sitting at my desk typing something like this out. But here we are. My hands are still a little shaky even thinking about what went down. And to be honest, I don't know if I'm proud of myself or just exhausted. Maybe both. I guess I need to start from the beginning, because none of this makes sense without the whole story. I've been working in corporate law for most of my career. Not the glamorous kind where you're in court every day, but the kind where you spend hours digging through contracts, compliance reports, and the kind of clauses that make normal people's eyes glaze over. It's not thrilling, but it's stable, and I've always had a knack for catching small details. My job was at a mid-sized firm that handled corporate clients. One of those clients was a large family-owned business. They weren't a household name, but in our industry they had clout. The CEO was one of those old-school guys who started from nothing, built a fortune, and ruled his empire with that kind of intimidating presence. He was strict, fair in his own way, but his son was a different story. The son was the kind of guy who grew up never hearing the word no. He wasn't my boss, but because of who his dad was, he had influence that reached far beyond his job title. He was supposed to be learning the ropes, so he could take over one day, but mostly he treated the office like his playground. He'd stroll in late, make jokes that weren't funny, undermine people in meetings, and then somehow get praised for thinking outside the box. I avoided him as much as possible. I've worked with difficult people before, but there was something about him that rubbed me the wrong way. I wish I could say I trusted my instincts sooner, but I didn't. I kept my head down and focused on my work. I was assigned to review a series of contracts tied to a merger they were working on. It was tedious, like most of my assignments, but I actually enjoyed digging through paperwork. I get a weird satisfaction from finding mistakes. During that process, I came across a clause buried deep in one of the agreements. It was a compliance clause tied to performance benchmarks. Basically, if the company failed to meet certain transparency standards, the other party had grounds to void the agreement and impose penalties. It was the kind of thing most people skim past, but it stood out to me because it was unusually specific. Around the same time, I noticed that the CEO's son had been handling parts of the negotiation on his own, which was odd, because he wasn't officially authorized to do that. He started sending out statements, making commitments he didn't have the authority to make. People assumed it was cleared by his dad, but I knew from the paperwork that it wasn't. I didn't think much of it at first. Then one day, I overheard him bragging to someone in the break room about burying problems in the merger documents. He laughed like it was some big inside joke. That's when my stomach dropped. I had already flagged some inconsistencies, but now I was wondering if those were deliberate. I went back through everything he had touched. Sure enough, I found evidence that he had concealed critical financial risks. He wasn't even clever about it. He just assumed no one would read the fine print closely. The problem was, if the merger went through with those risks hidden, it would come back to bite not just the company, but hundreds of employees who relied on that deal for stability. People's jobs, retirements, entire families would be impacted. I knew I couldn't just sit on it. But blowing the whistle in a situation like this isn't straightforward. The CEO's son had power, and if I accused him without ironclad proof, my career would be over. So I documented everything. Every email, every draft, every timestamp. I cross-referenced the original clause I found with the altered drafts he submitted. Piece by piece, I built a record that showed what he was doing. When I finally felt ready, I didn't go to his dad directly. Instead, I used the clause itself. I reached out to the other party in the merger. I couldn't outright tell them what was going on because of confidentiality rules, but I highlighted the compliance clause and asked them to review it carefully in light of recent submissions. That was enough to set off alarm bells on their side. Their legal team started digging. Within a week, they found what I had found. When it came crashing down, it was brutal. The other party threatened to pull out of the merger and sue for damages. The CEO had no choice but to investigate. That's when everything came to light. His son had been sloppy, arrogant, and reckless. The CEO was furious. I heard through the grapevine that he called his son into his office, and there was a shouting match that shook the entire floor. By the end of the day, the son's access was cut off and his name was scrubbed from the deal. I thought I would feel vindicated, but honestly, I just felt drained. People started whispering, trying to figure out who had caught the mistake. A few guessed it was me, but I didn't confirm or deny anything. Officially, it was the other party's legal team that triggered the issue. That gave me cover. I kept my head down and carried on like nothing happened. A few weeks later, the CEO called me into his office. I was terrified, thinking I'd be blamed somehow. But instead, he looked me in the eye and said, "You saved this company a disaster. I don't know how you saw it, but I'm grateful." He didn't mention his son once. He didn't have to. The silence said it all. Since then, things have been complicated. On one hand, I know I did the right thing. If I had stayed quiet, people would have been hurt. On the other hand, I can't shake the feeling that I just destroyed a man's relationship with his own son. As awful as that guy was, he's still someone's kid. I can't help but wonder if the CEO blames me privately, even though he thanked me. I don't know. What I do know is that sometimes the smallest details can change everything. One clause in one contract. One line that most people would skim right past. That's what brought the whole thing down. And it wasn't because I was a genius or some hero. It was because I paid attention when someone else didn't. Now I sit here wondering where this leaves me. I don't know if I have a future at this company, or if I even want one. Every time I see that empty office where the son used to sit, I feel a mix of relief and guilt. Relief that I stood my ground. Guilt that it had to come to this. Maybe that's just how it goes in corporate life. You don't win by being the loudest. You win by knowing when to let the paperwork speak for itself. I don't know if I'll ever tell anyone the full truth outside of this post. But getting it off my chest feels like lifting a weight I've been carrying for months. At the end of the day, she, meaning me, the one person everyone overlooked, used a single legal clause to destroy the CEO's son. And I still don't know if I feel proud, or just tired.